There are moments in life when time seems to freeze, when the truth, jagged and unforgiving, slices through the fragile fabric of your understanding. For me, that moment came on a brisk Saturday evening, in the warm glow of my brother's engagement dinner. I had always thought I knew my family, its flaws, its secrets, or so I naively believed. I'd spent weeks helping my mother arrange the evening, our cozy living room transformed into an elegant setting with fairy lights and silverware polished to perfection. The air carried the heady aroma of rosemary lamb and the soft cadence of clinking glasses. My brother, Nathan, sat at the center of it all, his face alight with a happiness I hadn't seen in years. Beside him was his fiancée, Elena, a woman with a radiant smile and eyes that seemed to pierce through you, as though she knew the weight of your every unspoken thought. I liked her instantly. She had a way of making everyone feel seen, her laughter drawing people in like moths to a flame. It was easy to see why Nathan had fallen so completely in love with her. But as the evening wore on, there was something in her gaze, something unspoken, that set me on edge. It wasn't the nerves of meeting the family, no, this was something heavier, something unsaid. The moment came after dessert, when the wine had flowed freely, and the room was soft with the kind of ease that only family gatherings can bring. Elena, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly, raised her glass for a toast. To the family, she began, her words carrying an edge of determination that silenced the room. And to the truths we builded on. Because without them, what are we? Her words lingered, hanging in the air like smoke. I saw my mother's smile falter, a flash of something, fear, panic. It happened so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. But I hadn't. Because what came next would unravel everything we thought we knew. The first time Nathan introduced us to Elena, I'd been skeptical. Not of her, but of the suddenness of it all. He had called us to the same living room, not more than 6 months ago, with a grin so wide it almost seemed out of place on his usually reserved face. I want you all to meet someone, he'd announced, his voice uncharacteristically buoyant. My father had looked up from his crossword puzzle, my mother from her knitting, and I from the novel I was half reading, half pretending to read. Elena had walked in moments later, wearing a pale blue dress that made her look both effortless and elegant. She had this energy about her as she belonged in every room she entered. My mother's first question was predictable. How did you two meet? She'd asked, a polite but probing smile on her lips. Nathan had answered for her, his hand resting protectively on her back. At a work conference, he'd said. We started talking and, well, here we are. Elena's laugh had been light but genuine. He left out the part where he spilled coffee on me, she added, her eyes meeting mine across the room. There was a knowingness in her gaze as if she could already sense the undercurrents of our family, the silences that spoke louder than words. Over the following months, Elena became a fixture in our lives. She was kind, attentive, and fiercely intelligent. She had a way of noticing the little things, the way my father's hands trembled slightly when he was tired, the way my mother's smile tightened when certain topics came up, the way I always volunteered to clear the table, avoiding the inevitable post-dinner discussions. She never pushed, never pried, but her presence alone felt like a mirror reflecting things we weren't ready to confront. One evening stands out in my memory, a dinner at Nathan's apartment just a month before the engagement announcement. It had been a small gathering, just Nathan, Elena, and me. We'd cooked together, laughter spilling over as Elena teased Nathan about his inability to dice an onion properly. But as we sat down to eat, the atmosphere shifted. So, Elena had said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Tell me about your childhood, both of you. I want to know all the embarrassing stories. Nathan chuckled, launching into a tale about the time I'd tried to build a treehouse and ended up falling out of the tree. But as the stories flowed, there was a carefulness to his words, a way he avoided certain memories, certain truths. Elena had noticed it too. I could see it in the way her brow furrowed ever so slightly, the way her gaze lingered on him a moment too long. When it was my turn, I deflected. Oh, you know how it is. Typical sibling stuff, I'd said, my voice too light, too rehearsed. Elena didn't press, but there was a heaviness in the silence that followed, an unspoken acknowledgement that typical didn't quite fit. Looking back, I realized that Elena had been quietly piecing things together all along. She had a way of seeing past the surface, of noticing the cracks we tried so hard to plaster over. And while I appreciated her kindness, it also terrified me, because some truths, once uncovered, can never be hidden again. As I sat in the living room that evening, watching Elena raise her glass, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to reveal something we weren't ready to face. As her words hung in the air, I found myself gripping the edge of my chair, bracing for the inevitable. The room had gone quiet. Too quiet. It was the kind of silence that weighed heavy in the air, pressing against your chest and stealing your breath. The kind that wasn't meant to linger at a celebration. Around me, the warmth of the engagement party felt like a distant memory, the laughter and clinking glasses replaced by the stark soundlessness of anticipation. Elena stood at the head of the table, her wine glass trembling ever so slightly in her hand. Her smile, so often a beacon of light, was now tight, forced as if she were steeling herself for a plunge into icy waters. To the family, she said again, her voice a fraction louder, firmer now. Her eyes flicked to Nathan, who looked at her with a mix of confusion and concern. My mother shifted in her seat, her hand gripping the edge of the tablecloth as though it could anchor her. My father's expression was unreadable, a mask of practiced neutrality that only deepened my unease. I sat frozen, watching Elena take a deep breath, the room collectively holding theirs along with her. "There's something I've come to know about this family," she began. "Something that I believe needs to be said. Because I love Nathan, and if I'm going to be part of this family, I can't pretend I don't know." "Elena," my mother interjected, her voice tight and brittle. "This isn't the time." "It is," Elena cut her off, her tone resolute but not unkind. "It's long past time." Nathan reached for her hand, his face pale now. "Elena, what's going on? What are you talking about?" She glanced down at him, her features softening for just a moment. "I'm sorry," she murmured, "but they need to hear this." My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears, drowning out the faint murmurs of confusion that rippled around the table. Elena turned to my parents, her gaze steady and unflinching. "You've kept this secret for years," she said. "And I understand why. But it's not fair, to Nathan, to his sister, to anyone." "Elena, that's enough," my mother snapped, rising slightly from her chair, her voice trembling with a fury I rarely saw. But it was too late. The words had already spilled into the room. "Nathan and Emma," Elena said, her voice cracking under the weight of what she was about to say. "You're not siblings, not by blood." The words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through my body. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt, the ground beneath me shifting violently. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe, the air suddenly too thick, too heavy. What the hell are you talking about?" Nathan's voice was a strangled whisper, his face etched with disbelief. He turned to my parents, his eyes wide and pleading. "Is this true? Mom? Dad?" I couldn't speak. Couldn't think. My mind was a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts and memories that now felt warped and tainted. Every childhood moment, every shared laugh, every sibling squabble, it all felt like a lie. I could hear my mother's shaky breathing, and could see the tears welling in her eyes as she struggled to find words. "Nathan, Emma," my father said finally, his voice low and rough. "It's true. But it doesn't change anything. You are our children, both of you. Doesn't change anything." I choked out, finding my voice at last. It was raw, trembling with the force of emotions I couldn't begin to name. "How can you say that? Everything's changed. Everything." Nathan was staring at our parents as though he didn't recognize them. "Why?" he demanded. "Why would you keep this from us? From me?" "It was for the best," my mother whispered, her voice breaking. "You were so young. We didn't want to confuse you, to hurt you. And as time went on, it just felt easier to let it be. Easier." My laugh was bitter, sharp. "For who? Certainly not for us." Elena's hand rested gently on Nathan's arm, her face etched with regret. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but you deserve to know." The room was a storm of emotions now, anger, betrayal, sorrow, and I felt like I was drowning in it. My hands gripped the arms of my chair as if they could keep me anchored to reality, but reality itself felt like it was slipping away. I wanted answers, explanations, something to make sense of the chaos that had just been unleashed. But all I had was the raw, aching truth, the life I thought I knew was a lie. As I looked around the table at the people I had called my family, one thought burned in my mind. If this was the truth, then what else had they been hiding? The room fractured under the weight of what had been said, the once festive air now poisoned with tension and disbelief. My mother, usually so composed, had slumped back into her chair, her face pale and drawn as though Elena's words had stripped her bare. My father sat stiffly, his hands clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles white. He didn't meet anyone's gaze, staring instead at some invisible point far beyond us. And then there was Nathan, my brother, or whatever he was now, his face contorted with disbelief and pain, as though his very foundation had been ripped from beneath him. But it was me who broke first. "What the hell were you thinking?" I shouted, my voice cutting through the suffocating silence. I was on my feet before I even realized it, my chest heaving with fury, betrayal, and something I couldn't yet name. "All these years, you've been lying to us. To me. How could you do this?" My mother flinched, her lips trembling as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Emma, please," she whispered. "It wasn't." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Don't you dare try to justify this." Nathan turned to her next, his voice quieter but no less devastating. "Mom, Dad, how could you lie to us for so long? What were you trying to protect us from? Or was it just easier to pretend nothing ever happened?" "We did what we thought was best," my father said at last, his voice rough and defensive. He looked at me then, his expression unreadable, though his eyes brimmed with guilt. "You were just children. You wouldn't have understood." "Understood," I repeated bitterly, my laughter hollow. I'm an adult now, and I still don't understand. What exactly was the plan? Just keep lying until… What? Until we found out this way. I gestured toward Elena, who stood silently, her face ashen. Nathan had risen now, his hands braced against the table as if he needed it to keep himself steady. Who am I, then? He asked, his voice breaking. If I'm not your son, who the hell am I? My mother broke into sobs, her hands flying to her face. You are our son, Nathan, she insisted, her words muffled through her tears. We raised you, we loved you, But you didn't tell me, Nathan spat, his voice louder now, angrier. You didn't let me decide what that meant. You decided for me. You lied to me. To Emma. I felt a bitter pang at his words, though they weren't directed at me. For years, Nathan had been the golden child, the steady one, the one who always seemed to have a place in the family that I had never quite felt was mine. And now, knowing he wasn't even truly my brother, it didn't make it better. It made it worse. Like I'd been clinging to a connection that wasn't even real. I can't do this, I muttered, pushing back my chair so hard it scraped against the floor. I turned and walked toward the door, my head spinning, and my stomach churning with too many emotions to name. Emma, wait, Nathan called, his voice cracking. I turned on him, the anger flaring again, sharp and hot. Why? So you can ask me if I knew. So we can pretend this isn't the most insane thing we've ever heard. No, Nathan. I need space. Emma, my father started, his tone softer now, almost pleading. No, I snapped. You don't get to speak right now. You don't get to fix this, Dad, because you broke it. You and Mom, you broke everything. I turned and left, slamming the door behind me, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow as I stumbled onto the porch, leaning heavily against the railing. The sound of the door creaking open behind me made me whip around, ready to yell, but it was Nathan who stepped out, his hands raised in surrender. I just want to talk, he said quietly. I laughed bitterly, crossing my arms over my chest. Talk about what? How we've been lied to our entire lives. How nothing we thought was real is. Nathan stepped closer, his expression pained. Emma, I'm just as messed up about this as you are. I'm not here to fight with you. I shook my head, trying to contain the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm me. You don't get it, Nathan. You've always been Mom and Dad's favorite, the perfect son. And now I don't even know where I fit in anymore. He recoiled slightly, as though my words had struck him. You think this is easy for me? To find out I don't belong? That I'm not even really their son? And what does that make me? I shot back, my voice rising. Some consolation prize, the one they wanted. God, Nathan, I don't even know who I am anymore. Nathan's jaw clenched, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Maybe we don't know who we are. But we're still us, Emma. You're still my sister. That doesn't change. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to cling to the certainty in his voice, to the bond we'd built over years of shared childhood memories. But the cracks were too deep, and the pain too fresh. Maybe, I said softly, my voice trembling. But I don't know how to trust anything anymore. Not after this. Nathan didn't reply, his silence stretching between us like a chasm. And as I turned away, staring out into the darkness, I realized that the fallout wasn't just about the secret itself. It was about everything it had shattered along the way. The house was quiet when I returned the next day, the kind of quiet that felt alive, buzzing with unspoken words and lingering tension. But I didn't go inside. I needed space, a kind of clarity that four walls could never provide. Instead, I found myself driving aimlessly until I ended up at the old park Nathan and I used to visit as kids. The bench by the lake had aged, its wood weathered and cracked, but it still stood, steadfast against the years. I sat down and stared at the water, my thoughts a tangle of anger, confusion, and aching loss. The ripples on the lake's surface mirrored the chaos inside me, constant and relentless. How do you even begin to process something like this? That the family you've spent your entire life loving, or resenting, was built on a lie. That the brother you thought you knew was connected to you only by the threads of shared experiences, not blood. And yet, the memories we shared weren't lies. The time he held my hand when I scraped my knee, the way he made me laugh until I cried, even the stupid arguments over who got to use the TV first, they were real. Weren't they? Mind if I sit? I turned to see Clara standing a few feet away, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. Her expression was cautious, almost tentative. I nodded, and she lowered herself onto the bench beside me. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me, she admitted after a moment. Her voice was soft like she was treading carefully around my emotions. But I wanted to check on you. I'm fine, I said automatically, though we both knew it wasn't true. Clara let the silence settle before speaking again. You have every right to be angry. At me, at them, at the universe, honestly. But I need you to know something. She paused, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet intensity. The truth doesn't undo the love you've shared. It might change how you see things, but it doesn't erase what's real. Her words hit me like a jolt, breaking through the fog in my mind. What's real? I repeated, testing the phrase, letting it roll over my tongue like an unfamiliar taste. Yes, she said firmly. Your love for Nathan, and his for you, it's not about blood. It's about everything you've been through together, everything you mean to each other. That's real. I stared at her, my chest tightening as the weight of her words sank in. Maybe she was right. Maybe the bond one had with Nathan wasn't dependent on biology. Maybe family wasn't about secrets or lies but about the moments we chose to show up for each other, the connections we fought to keep despite everything. As Clara stood to leave, she touched my shoulder gently. Take your time, Emma, but don't let this break you. You're stronger than that. Her footsteps faded into the distance, leaving me alone with my thoughts. For the first time in days, the chaos in my head began to quiet. I didn't have all the answers, maybe I never would, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to run from this anymore. It was time to face the truth, to confront my family and my feelings, and to start piecing together the parts of my life that felt shattered. This wasn't the ending, it was the beginning of something else, something I could choose to shape. I stood from the bench, my resolve hardening. It was time to stop letting the past define me. Time to take control of what came next. The living room was heavy with tension as I stood before my family, the faces of those I loved, those who had hurt me, etched with unease. My mother's hands fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, my father sat rigid and silent, and Nathan stared at the floor, his jaw tight. For the first time in days, I didn't feel overwhelmed by their emotions. I wasn't here to absorb their guilt, their excuses, or even their apologies. I was here for me. I've been angry, I began, my voice steady despite the knot in my throat. Angry because you didn't trust me enough to handle the truth. Angry because I've spent my life feeling like I didn't quite fit, and now I know why. But I've realized something. Carrying that anger isn't going to change the past, it's only going to hold me back. And I'm done letting this define me. My mother broke into tears, a quiet sob shaking her shoulders, but I didn't stop. I had to finish. What you did, it was wrong. I can't pretend it wasn't, but I also know you were trying to protect us in your way. And despite the lies, despite everything, I know you love me. I know you love Nathan. That's what I'm holding on to. Nathan finally looked up, his eyes red but determined. Emma, he said, his voice rough, you're my sister. I don't care what anyone says or what's in some DNA test. You're my family. You always will be. Yes, she said firmly. Your love for Nathan, and his for you, it's not about blood. It's about everything you've been through together, everything you mean to each other. That's real. I stared at her, my chest tightening as the weight of her words sank in. Maybe she was right. Maybe the bond one had with Nathan wasn't dependent on biology. Maybe family wasn't about secrets or lies but about the moments we chose to show up for each other, the connections we fought to keep despite everything. As Clara stood to leave, she touched my shoulder gently. Take your time, Emma, but don't let this break you. You're stronger than that. Her footsteps faded into the distance, leaving me alone with my thoughts. For the first time in days, the chaos in my head began to quiet. I didn't have all the answers, maybe I never would, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to run from this anymore. It was time to face the truth, to confront my family and my feelings, and to start piecing together the parts of my life that felt shattered. This wasn't the ending, it was the beginning of something else, something I could choose to shape. I stood from the bench, my resolve hardening. It was time to stop letting the past define me. Time to take control of what came next. The living room was heavy with tension as I stood before my family, the faces of those I loved, those who had hurt me, etched with unease. My mother's hands fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, my father sat rigid and silent, and Nathan stared at the floor, his jaw tight. For the first time in days, I didn't feel overwhelmed by their emotions. I wasn't here to absorb their guilt, their excuses, or even their apologies. I was here for me. I've been angry, I began, my voice steady despite the knot in my throat. Angry because you didn't trust me enough to handle the truth. Angry because I've spent my life feeling like I didn't quite fit, and now I know why. But I've realized something. Carrying that anger isn't going to change the past, it's only going to hold me back. And I'm done letting this define me. My mother broke into tears, a quiet sob shaking her shoulders, but I didn't stop. I had to finish. What you did, it was wrong. I can't pretend it wasn't, but I also know you were trying to protect us in your way. And despite the lies, despite everything, I know you love me. I know you love Nathan. That's what I'm holding on to. Nathan finally looked up, his eyes red but determined. Emma, he said, his voice rough, you're my sister. I don't care what anyone says or what's in some DNA test. You're my family. You always will be.